Okay, so what we saw so far, you can use Crossplane to create managed resources. You can create compositions or composition configurations to combine all those resources into something meaningful. And where we left was creating something like this. Ignore the errors because I messed up completely the setup by accidentally destroying the cluster a minute before this session, and then all the resources. Anyways, if you see errors, that's my fault. Imagine that you don't. Um, what was I saying? Yes. So you can create resources, and this is a composition SQL claim, right? That creates and manages in case of AWS VPC subnet, subnet group, RDS, and so on and so forth, right? Now, there are two problems with that. And one of those two problems I'm not addressing in a book, but we can talk about it. One is that there is not enough flexibility as is, right? You cannot, for example, say, you know what? I will let users define, let's say, since we're creating a database, I will let users to define any number of users in that database that they would like. Or, for example, schemas, right? You cannot have variable something. You need to be static. Oh, it's always this or nothing, right? Uh, and that's because the schema for Crossplane is intentionally dumb, right? The decision was made that the schema of Crossplane compositions is not going to be expanding to add conditionals like if-else statements and loops and all the shenanigans that we normally have, right? But keeping it simple means that you cannot do necessarily everything you want to do. And the solution to that problem, I think we released it like a year ago or something like that, is to introduce functions, meaning that instead of specifying in YAML all the different components that should be included in your composition, we can let composition at runtime call a function, send to that function the list of the existing resources that were created so far, and then expect function to give an output. And tell Crossplane, you know what? This is the list of resources, and I generated it any way I like. You can use Python, you can use Go, you can use Q. Crossplane doesn't care what the function is. The only thing it really cares is that it will send an input to a function, and it expects a list of resources as an output, right? And those list resources generated any way you like is what will be considered the managed resources that belong to that composition.
So
And
Victor, maybe
uh-huh.
maybe a design question. You said that Crosspoint started with a fixed number of resources
No,
that
not fixed, but
an
when you
array and
did
an array that you put in your composition, right?
exactly,
And
exactly,
if you want one extra thing based off, like if the claim says I want this included, you cannot do like if user wants
yeah,
this, add one to the list, right? It's a fixed list that
correct,
you create an array. But the
correct.
and it's a as we have seen, it's like a bunch of patch and transformation, no programming logic around it, right?
Exactly. You can patch a value of some resource, but you cannot have a conditional say, oh, if the value is true, then add this resource, otherwise don't. Or a loop, go through this array, and whatever is the value of an array in a claim, that is the list of resources I want to create. Or any. So no conditionals, no loops, no programming logic of any
So
kind.
that's and I'm just playing devil's advocate. Like
Sure.
some people in the community might say, well, Kubernetes was designed to be a declarative model, right? When we define a deployment and a pod, we use YAML. And YAML is not
Mm-hmm.
a language that you can insert inside the YAML saying, if the user says this, add extra containers to the deployment. Or if the value equals 5, I add 5 volumes, right, to the deployment.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea with that, I thought, or the principle that I've read everywhere is it's declarative. Whatever that specification is data, right? is not configurations, like specific data. That's the desired state of the data. Then the controller goes do imperative thing and they give you that result. So you could potentially say that the desired thing that you want, you can have high confidence that that's what you're going to get. And that's something that we put in GitOps, right? You put this in Git,
Yes.
and that's the configuration that you get. You don't get more containers, you don't get less containers, you don't get more volumes, you don't get less volumes. And with Crossplane, you had that, right? You get this fix of resources, but it wasn't that because you were doing partial transformation already. Yeah, you were mutating things. Now we add logic that the desired state is kind of like an input that can take logic into it, right? So it's more dynamic. Like I'm trying to say, like, has some benefits, but the trade-off is you are at the mercy of that. And we're going to get into functions of whatever the functions decide to. Is that the final desired state? Is that desired state? I don't longer have like total control. I have some control of the inputs, but not total control.
That's partly true. I see it slightly differently. So there is a desired state of what you tell Kubernetes to create, which resource to create, right? Like desired state could be a deployment, right? Or a claim. And claim has no conditionals or any of those things. Now, at least in Kubernetes, when we specify the desired state, we specify of that resource, not really of all the child resources that will be created. So, for example, in Kubernetes, I'm not talking about Crossplane, you can say, you don't say, I want 7 pods. You say, I want a deployment that behind the scenes inside of the cluster will create a replica set and 7 pods. And when I update deployment, it will create a second replica set. And if I add HPA...
I was going to say HPA. Is the
HPA
example,
will...
right?
Exactly. So the definition of HPA is declarative, right? But what HPA does is a separate, right, kind of separate subject. So I see more that interaction with Kubernetes API is declarative. But HPA controller is not declarative. It's Go code, right? It does something by manipulating deployments or whatever it's doing, right? So I'm now talking about, when I say functions, I'm talking from the perspective of a controller, right? You might need more flexibility to create a controller that will do something, like HPA does something, right?
Yeah. So that perfect. So I wanted to have this discussion because like it's healthy, right? For people to understand these aspects of like, because they also ask questions like, well, it's not that declarative. Kubernetes is declarative, and that's the desired state. And I was playing devil's advocate, but you brought the perfect example, the HPA. HPA is a controller that affects the number of replicas that is in the deployment. That by best practice, you should not put a fixed number, right? The same, you're building a controller. So in Crossplane, I always see Crossplane the same way I guess I see Meta Controller.
Yes,
it's a framework to create Kubernetes controllers. It happens to be that the typical way that people know Kubernetes controller is using something like operator framework and KubeBuilder, using Go. And that's kind of like I call it maybe a traditional one, or like the most common, most well-known one that you see everywhere. But this other abstraction is higher level, right? Make it easier, the entry point for engineers to write a controller, but using other abstractions like meta controller and Crossplane. So in this case, you were actually creating a controller you didn't tell, like with patch and transformation. But the framework didn't have the ability to do an if or a for loop. So functions, now with functions is the ability to get that.
Exactly. Where was I? Yes. Okay. So a second problem is that there's, for some people, there's too much YAML, right? Patch and transform can drive you nuts. kind of like you can easily end up on average having 10 patch and transform instructions, each of them like 3-4 lines for each of the resources. It's a nightmare, right? Now that second part, nightmare YAML, that's not in a book, but because I solved it afterwards, but I'll show you later. Now, before I go into functions, cool functions, let me show you a patch and transform function itself, right? So this is a definition of a function that is doing patch and transform, exactly this, almost exactly the same functionality that is baked into Kubernetes, but now that functionality is provided like a function, right? And if I want this, so this is a function, right? It's a container that has some code inside, accepts input, it creates output. That's what it does, not much more, right? And I'm going to apply to the cluster. Wrong command. There we go. Applied. And now I have a function. Like if I say get functions, you will see that function patch and transform is running in a cluster, and it performs certain operations. We're going to see them in a second, right? And here's a updated version of the composition that we explored before. Now, this is literally copy and paste. You would have a hard time actually finding the difference between what we did before and what this composition is doing. There are only a few differences. First is that the mode is now pipeline. And pipeline is very similar to pipelines like in CI/CD, right? There is step number one that does something and then creates an output for the step number two, and which takes that output as input, generates some other things, and so on and so forth. So it's step one, step two, step three, and each of them creates.
They're linked, like the output of the previous one is the input to the next one.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. They all have the responsibility. Every function has a responsibility to return all the resources back. Not only the resources that function generated, but also those that were created before, right? So that your function can theoretically, if it's third in line, third step, it could say, you know what? Those 3 resources that were created before me, I'm going to remove them, right? You can do whatever you want. You get an array of resources and you're supposed to return an array of resources as well, right? And the rest is basically the same as before, except that those inputs, actually that I'm referencing that function that we saw before, and these resources like what is this, VPC and subnet and whatsoever, they will not be anymore collected by Crossplane directly. They'll be collected by a separate container that runs that function, right? This is functionally the same as before.
So, Viktor, there's some chat like me and Sevi. So if, at least for me, when I started with Crossplane, I started building this composition, like using patch and transform, not this one. And I have a YAML file that is like 500, 600 lines. It's a nightmare to go through it. So I was mentioning to Sevi that this feels like XSLT when we're doing XML transformation, right? It's like trying to program with just like this metadata inside, trying to make metadata do things, right? And to get to a point, to a degree, we as maybe programmers or engineers, it's hard to parse. But in your case, this is not better than before, right?
Yeah,
it's
because
patch and transform.
I did not get there, but okay, let me show you actually something that is not in the book. This is one of my compositions, right? And it has a pipeline, and it is using KCL function. KCL is a language similar to Q and what's not, right? And there is no, if you ignore this part, there is no YAML, right? All I'm doing is saying, hey, this is the KCL definition that has stuff. Like there is a number of items. It's still not far from YAML, but it's a different language. And I'm generating all this stuff, and then I'm returning it back to Crossplane. And then I have another one that defines some variables, blah, blah, blah. KCL in this case, I'm not sure how many people are familiar or not with it, but the point is that here I'm executing a completely different programming language that is going to provide an output back to Crossplane with a list of resources. There are examples with Go. I think that there is Java, Python, Go templating. That's the one I used in a book, and so on and so forth, right? So all you really have to do is specify, let's go back here. Tell Crossplane, hey, use this function that I deployed before. You can create your own functions. And I will send two things to that function. I will send it the list of all the resources assembled earlier, plus whatever you specified as the source code of that function. Sorry, not the source code. That was bad. The input of that function, which in this case, I don't think I have any, right? So this function itself will assemble some resources and combine it with all the resources that were assembled before that function and return something back to Crossplane. So in theory, at least, it can be any language you want, as long as that language is capable of sending output back with a list of resources.
Interesting.
Does
But
it
this
make
is
sense?
equivalent, right? But than before.
Referring what you early said, so YAML doesn't have if this happens or if this resource is that way or configured this way, it is doing this functionality, right?
Yeah. For example, here, just as a simple example, right? Just because I have it on the screen, like it's an if. Okay, so if somebody defined external name, then I want to put this label. If not, I want to put some other label.
Yeah, brilliant.
There are loops. Like here, I'm iterating. This is an array, and I'm iterating through that array and then assembling things. I probably have a loop example somewhere. Maybe I don't in this specific function. But yes, the point is that Crossplane doesn't care about what function does, how it's doing it, in which language. It cares none of those things. It's just, I'm going to give you an array, you give me back an array. That's all.
You can use a function to take advantage of programming languages, right? So you will have your variables where you can reuse your if statements and the loops. That's those and the when, like which is an if. But basically, those are the three main components, right?
Yeah. Actually,
it blew my mind, to be honest. I was not expecting this.
Say again?
It blew my mind. I was not expecting this in the form of Kubernetes resource, basically.
Yeah. Actually, this specific composition, I showed you earlier this package, and I think I showed you this. Even this YAML that you see here, I did not write it myself. I generate even the few lines that are required, just the basic Kubernetes structure before we get to the language. Even that I'm generating here with KCL. It's literally my whole, So my whole source code is here, and I have a process that converts it. This is my compositions. And
a different layer of abstraction, a DSL. This is a DSL, and then you generated so you don't have to open your editor with a YAML file.
No. I wrote this composition here, which is equivalent of probably a couple of thousand lines of YAML, 5, maybe 10. There is not a single line of YAML I wrote.
Nice.
You are forced.
Hey, Viktor, can you give a real life example where you solved a problem with function where it couldn't be done with the YAML?
Okay, so we're coming to that.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure whether it's real. It's a demo that simulates real world problem.
Valid use case. Yeah, valid use case.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let me apply this. Nothing should happen. Let me show you. Okay, so here's the thing. This is the, among other things, this composition creates a database. And when I say database in this context, I don't mean a server. So it's AWS RDS server that will have one or more databases in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And right now, without functions, I'm forced to have one database or two or three. But the number is always going to be the same because there are no conditionals, there are no loops, there are none of those things, right? So what I did is I changed my definition and I said, hey, you know what? You as a user, you can define a list of database names as an array, and I will generate them for you from a composition. So you can have 0 empty array or 1 or 2 or 5. It's your decision as a person who claims that composition, right? So I'm going to apply the definition, right? And I'm going to use in this case Go templating. I chose Go templating because most people are most familiar with it because it's essentially the same as Helm templating, right? I don't use it myself, so don't judge me if you're not fan, right? So I'm going to apply now Go templating function to the cluster so that Crossplane can use it. And I'm going to show you a modified version of a composition that solves the problem with number of databases. So here, and again, imagine in your head that this is not Go templating, that this is your favorite language, whatever that language is. Here I'm saying, okay, you know what? Go through all the values in the databases field of the claim, and for each of them, generate a new database resource. So basically, if you specify 5, this will be a loop that will generate 5 of those. Makes sense so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing that to mention here, like if there are DevOps individuals that, including myself, that started doing Helm charts and got very good at whipping up a Helm chart and learning the Helm language, which because I call them Helm language. For the longest time, I didn't know it was Go. It was, to me, it was just a Helm language. And I know a lot of individuals, like customers, that they don't know this is a Go language, but they know Helm and they do Helm charts and all that. So this is a very powerful thing because those individuals were handling a lot of Helm charts and trying to do that like deployment outside. Now they have a capability of having kind of like of a Helm controller where they can write that program of that controller inside Kubernetes, and then Crossplane will give them the way of like that flexibility of defining resources. And again, Crossplane is not about cloud, because you can put like a config map, a secret, a service, an ingress, and a deployment, and create a composition that says this is my app, and nothing about cloud, just like things that you usually put in customizing Helm, but you manage in Git. Now you have the flexibility to manage that inside a controller, and then you have more capabilities to offer more dynamic way, right? You have a claim, and that claim basically is kind of like a values.yaml for your controller. If that's the language that you're good at, right? We have to match where people are. Like that's your skill. That's what you establish. That's what you're linking. That's what you establish in your company. Then you're take advantage of this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so there are many functions like that are basically enable you to use your favorite language, like in this case, Go templating, same as Helm templating. There are some other functions that do some funky stuff. For example, one that you might be interested, Carlos, is that there is a function that will calculate CIDRs, IP ranges,
CIDR math,
and then
doing math for CIDRs, like how many subnets,
exactly.
Where does it start, where does it end?
Exactly.
Split this CIDR into 3 subnets, and like I'm usually looking for the calculator. And Helm has that, by the way.
Okay, wasn't aware of that.
Sorry,
yes.
sorry. Terraform has a lot of like those little functions to do those type of things.
Yeah, the major difference, and that was kind of a long debate, right, is whether we should go Terraform path and extend Crossplane compositions, basically convert Crossplane schema into a language. And we came quickly to a conclusion that kind of this is going to sound bad, but we are not language designers. We don't know how to do that well, and we don't want to do that, right? So instead of extending the schema of Crossplane to allow, constructs like that, no, fuck it. Sorry for the language. Use whatever you want.
Yeah, and this is it's because we live in a world. I think I don't know if people saw the event last night from the Kubernetes 10th year. I think Eric said it that we had for the longest time. We have computer scientists, and then we have practitioners. And Kubernetes and Docker came from the practitioner side of side versus computer scientists. So in this case, you can make a composition in Crossplane have the best language in the world. Let's say we're going to use Qlang, just to pick one that people like. But because there's no 10 or 15 years of knowing that language, it's not popular. So it's not practical. So it's better to offer something like, hey, you know what? You can use Python. Hey, you know what? You can use Perl. Hey, you know what? You can use Golang. Hey, you know what? You can use Helm. That's a practitioner decision, right? And in Kubernetes, we are more practitioners than computer scientists. So that's, I think, my point of view.
Exactly. So
and Q, I bet you can create a function with Q, right? You have at it.
Actually, the one I showed you with KCL, that was until 2 months ago, fully written in Q, and then I was bored and rewrote it in KCL.
Well, keep it around because I think people are also liking Q. So it doesn't matter. We're practitioners, right? In the DevOps world, we're practitioners. Our field is a practitioners that we get paid to get things into production in the best way, right? We're not paid to write papers in research, which there are other people get paid to do that.
Exactly.
And what's going to ask? Does the function get the information from the claim, like the composite or the claim, or both? Also,
yeah. For example, this is the field from the claim.
Oh, it's called observe. Okay, under dot observe, there's an object that you get in your Python code or Go code.
Exactly. So this is, so think of it this way, right? It gets two things. It gets the whole definition of the claim of the composition itself, right?
Oh, observe the composite resource. Oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly. And this is spec parameters database. This is whatever you define.
Or it could be metadata annotations. So
yeah, you could fetch the name of the metadata name or labels or anything you want. So basically, it's all in observed composite resource. Now, the syntax might differ from one function to another, but basically it's that.
Okay, yeah, it's a JSON. It's a JSON input, right? It's a dictionary, JSON, whatever is your language.
So basically, you get two things. You get the observed resource, that's the composition, composite resource. And you get, I'm not showing it in this example, you get the array of all the resources that were assembled before. So all those things before that step, they're also passed to the function. So I could have a function that modifies some values of the previous resources assembled before.
But your contract in your function, like you as a good citizen, your contract is to return. I guess as a best practice, return everything. If you remove something, it's because intentionally you decided that this thing should not go in. For example, somebody wants to create something that they shouldn't. So maybe you have an OPA policy or something like this condition. We never allow it. And that's your way to catch it, right? That's your validation policy.
Exactly. And you can write. So for example, here I'm outputting some new resources, but I could, for example, change. I could add the label here to the claim itself. I could modify the claim as well. I could modify the composition that created by claim. I could modify the existing resources created by composition, or I could delete them. Basically, I get the full spec of everything from claim downwards, and I can change anything I want. So, for example,
I think
I'm using
the composition will not mutate back the compos. Oh yeah, it can. Yeah, it can mutate the composite. Yeah.
So, for example, I'm using very
status.
often that to
Status.
I was about to say status. I don't have it in this example, but I would have resource, status, I don't know, like database name, and put it to something. Or
which is a common best practice, right? That's a common pattern of like, as you create compositions, you need to give feedback back to the claim or composite of like what's going on. And usually it's like with the status. You can create your own common way of creating conditions or your status, but you need to give that information back when you, and that's the reason you have ability in the XRD, what's called a definition, to define the columns. So when people do kubectl get, you get you choose what information from the status you want to display in those columns. Like, and again, you're building a Kubernetes controller, and people don't realize that this is just a framework to create Kubernetes controllers, that you don't have to create an image, you don't have to host it, you don't have to compile.
Kube builder.
Yes.
Or one of those, meta controller of any of those. Exactly. Yeah. Now pay attention here. I'm iterating through all the values of the databases array in a claim and generating a database for each of them. Right now in my cluster, I have one database. Now, if I apply this, changes to the composition, do you know how many databases I will have? None.
I see.
And the reason why I got no databases now is because I did not specify them. In the previous claim I was running did not have this new field. I just added this field, right? So it went through the array, it said, it's empty. How many databases you want? 0. How many do I have right now? 1. Let me remove it.
And remove it. I see.
Right? But now, this is a claim. And the changes from before, and the only change from what I had before is this field, databases. I'm saying I want databases DB1, DB2. And if I apply this claim, I should get now 2 databases. There we go. Right?
Yeah, so,
because
so scroll a little bit up. Want to talk about this example? No, with the databases. With the databases, the claim. So I think Satish was asking for like real world examples. So I'm working with customers, and they're defining. You can create anything with Crossplane. So it happens that they're creating Kubernetes clusters using EKS. And one of the things that is dynamic in the claim is giving this other team saying you can request a Kubernetes cluster, an EKS cluster, and they have a section that is which add-ons do you want to install with the EKS cluster, and which Helm charts do you want to install that cluster. So I want Cert Manager, I want the kube proxy at this version, I want the CNI on this version. So when they need to upgrade Kubernetes, they know they need to update the add-ons, and then this other team doesn't want certain add-ons, and this other team wants the same add-ons with different versions. So the platform team is just giving an API for people to create an EKS cluster, and they decide which add-ons they want. And also the team that there's another company that offers which managed node groups do you want, what are the size of the nodes, and that's all. That information is dynamic. I used to do that without functions, and functions is a new thing. We used Crossplane before functions. And what these customers and myself we were doing was creating multiple compositions iterations. We had like 50 of them. So if you want one managed node group, we have one composition. If you want a cluster with 2 managed node group, we have another one. If you want another one with this set of add-ons in another composition, if you want an extra add-on, we create another composition. So basically you were selecting which template to use, and it was very cumbersome. I think that was the biggest problem with Crossplane. It was very cumbersome because it didn't have this dynamic way of like driving this dynamic configuration, that the possible configuration that the user will give you, and then you turn around and you create everything you want, like you can do in CDK or you can do in Terraform and these other methods. So practitioner that's where they were comparing Crossplane against that. They were willing to deal with the patch and transform and YAML lines of thousands of lines of YAML, but when it got to the point of like dynamic configuration, they got stuck of like, this is insane. I don't know if
Okay.
Victor had the same opinion with other end users.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, simply not enough flexibility, right? You want to give your end users flexibility to do what they need and hide the things they don't care about. That would be my explanation of it, right? And I was mocking while you were talking, right? If this would be a Kubernetes cluster, you would probably have something like this in your
and
claim,
they were
right?
comparing this to Terraform, I think TF variables. They were comparing that to, but I give my users TF files, TF variables, and they just put a dictionary of like which add-ons do they need, which managed node group they would need, and then we create the cluster for them. Or some users just, I don't know why, but they gave the app team Terraform, and the app team didn't know what to do with Terraform.
Way to describe it could be that imagine if you take Helm chart, but split it and say on the client side, you have only the values file. And the chart itself, like templates and stuff, are running in a cluster, right? It's almost like that. And then that chart will parse that values file and do whatever needs to be done, except that now the action is happening inside of the cluster and not on your laptop.
Yeah, that's why I said that you're running a Helm controller. By the way, there are uses today that they use Helm chart to create that dynamic way. I have an end user that is creating like a Lambda and SQS, and depending which S3 like input, like Lambda and SQS and Lambda and S3, they're using it in Helm charts, and they're able to do like that with Argo and Helm charts, and they're not using compositions. Basically, like they're rendering the manifest, but when it came to getting some information from this object into another one, like the output status of one resource becomes the input status from another one. So for example, when you create a VPC, you need the subnet ID to pass it to the Kubernetes cluster when you're creating it. You cannot do that in Helm chart because at that time you don't know those results yet. You need to run that in cluster to get the value of one, to pass it to the other one, and then the other one starts creating. Well, in Crossplane, both starts creating. One is like error. I don't have this value. Or I think you can block it by saying it required, and then it gets passed.
Yeah, I mean the value can be required, but so that's one of the differences, right? Crossplane doesn't have a dependency mechanism, but it does fails to create stuff until all the data for those resources is gathered, right? So you cannot say subnet depends on VPC, but you can say I need I need the ID of the VPC, so subnet will not be created until that data is assembled, right?
So one question.
Go ahead, Sabi.
If one function's result changes over time, how would this be handled?
Say again, sorry?
If one function's result changes over time because of other resources being provisioned, how is this going to be handled by Crossplane? Like, for example, I didn't have my 3 subnets, but I had my 1 subnet, right? And now they're slowly being created. And my function, how does my function respond to that? And how does it handle?
No, the
not
function,
but like how does Crossplane handle all this through a function? Let me say, maybe hard
so it's simply, it cannot create. Until you assemble a resource, each individual resource, it cannot start working on it, right? And since you cannot assemble a subnet without VPC ID, right? It will just fail. Kind of like Crossplane is based on the idea that, I'm going to be failing until I succeed somehow.
So Sebi, maybe rephrase it. Your function keeps running. You get called like every minute. Your function keeps running.
All the time,
you're building a controller. You're building a program.
Okay.
And your function in your program is your function. You keep running it.
Right,
So in your function, you can say, until I have my 3 subnets and they're ready, I'm not going to return the EKS cluster. Like maybe in the 5th time when you get called, because maybe it takes a long time to create something. Or maybe the EKS cluster gets, I mean, your example of a subnet, it's like maybe by the 5th time that your function gets called, you say, now I have 3 subnets and they're ready because I get the status. Now I have the values that I can pass to my EKS cluster, and then you're in your if statement, like I'm going to like in that YAML that I output, the EKS cluster will be included with the 3 values of the subnets, and it goes. And it could be like the 3 days later, somebody changes the subnet number, right? And you run again, it's like, oh,
right,
your program is your reconciler. Crossplane is just calling you, but you are responsible. You're the reconciler. You're the controller. Crossplane is just calling your function.
I got it. Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
This is a very difficult concept to understand for a lot of people. I have to say, even for me, like I'm just saying it because it was for me to understand all these moving pieces. And there's no, I'm not going to blame the community, but video. I think Viktor is the only source of videos that I can explain this that I have found.
And very often, actually, one way would be what you were saying, if I understood right, Carlos, kind of like you can embed that logic out, don't create subnets because I cannot do this or that. The other thing is to send back subnets to Crossplane without VPC ID. Crossplane is going to go to AWS and say, create this subnet for me.
So that's
and AWS.
It's going to, and then AWS is going to complain and say rate limiting because you have thousands of API calls, and then you call me and say like, why are you calling the API so many times, Viktor?
That's also true.
Okay. No, I definitely got it. In the beginning, it was more like, oh, I use my function to do one thing and it stays there, like the list, for example, or like the dictionary I got in the end.
If I want to add an add-on or a database next week, I can just go to Git at the database, then Argo will pick it up, Argo will send it to the Kubernetes, Crossplane would like see that there's a change, or maybe you will pick it up in the next cycle. This lowers the barrier to. Go ahead.
You saw the example with the database, right? Kind of, I updated composition without changing the claim. And on the next iteration of the composition, it said, oh, now you want 0 database. It's excellent, right? And so, yes, I don't remember the frequency, every minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that. It assembles all the resources from all the functions, everything.
Yep. So, yeah, this is, at least for the DevOps community, right, that there's many people that work on DevOps that are not saying hardcore, but their job is not to write Go code every day for 8 hours. For people that are actually in the Kubernetes community, which I would say is smaller to the larger number of people using Kubernetes, those smaller people that know Go and work on Go every day for 8 hours, it's super easy to build a controller for Kubernetes. Like just download KubeBuilder. I think I did a session, right, a couple of weeks of KubeBuilder. Download KubeBuilder. You said, I want to create, I don't know, EKS controllers, talk to the AWS API, write a few functions of Go code only for the use case in their company. And in a week, whoop, they have a controller. And some companies are doing that I work with. They're writing their own controllers.
Oh, yeah.
But the majority of end users of Kubernetes don't have those engineerings, and they're not working on that. They have people that know networking, they know cloud, they know containers, they know all these other security, validation policies, CI/CD pipelines, right? DevOps folks that are not going to spend a week implementing a Go controller for then the rest of the year not touch Go, right? And this is a vehicle of higher level abstraction to give you controllers out of the box that you just use and assemble.
Yeah, I would even go as far as now with the. I didn't think about it before, but Crossplane might be actually more similar to, let's say, Meta Controller than Terraform in a way.
Yeah, Meta Controller. That's why I always bring up Meta Controller. And I have a customer evaluating both ACK, Crossplane, and Meta Controller. They're doing a POC with Meta Controller. And nothing against the Meta open source Meta Controller project or the individuals there, but I said, like, I myself, I don't know, I haven't seen a lot of people using Meta Controller in production or giving talks in KubeCon or like that community being healthy in production, or CVEs or companies behind it, like to use it in production. So it may be a good project because I tried once and it was a good project, but I didn't see a lot of collateral out there, like people using it. So that's risk of picking something that maybe it's abandoned. I don't know if it's abandoned or not, but that's risk.
Yeah. Anybody else? This is fun. I mean, the rest of the chapter is basically other examples of the same.
Yeah, same concept, right? Different languages. So Python, I know Python is out of the box. I know Go is out of the box. Helm Go is out of the box. The KCL also, I think, yeah, KCL is available. You can do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
We just need a LLM that just writes the compositions, and we're done with KCL.
Exactly. Exactly.
So one question for KCL: the .k files, are there like VS Code extensions that will make your color and syntax? Like, have they done that? Because it looks like I'm going to have trouble like editing that file and if it doesn't have syntax.
You have VS Code
extension or something.
Extension, yeah, exactly. It's kind of there's a language server. Actually, I'm doing here some funky stuff. So because I'm using KCL to what am I doing? To build a YAML, and then also KCL to embed KCL inside of KCL so that becomes KCL function. It's me going crazy, but yes.
Yeah, because I think I saw in your composition. I saw you in composition that the composition itself has the source code.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So I'm kind of, because you have a shell, the API kind, there is some things that needs to be YAML simply for Kubernetes API to accept it as a composition. And then inside that YAML, it's a function with the source code. And then I just embed KCL inside of that YAML generated by KCL.
And typically you have one function?
Sometimes more because, for example, that example that I showed before with KCL, I have two. One is that those compositions are to create Kubernetes clusters in AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. And then there are two functions. One is with the common stuff, like all the applications and namespaces that are going to be the same in all three clusters.
Okay.
And then a second one is specific for AWS or Azure or Google, right?
Yeah, you're composing isolating concerns. Yeah.
But that's more kind of coding, right? It was easier for me to code it as two functions, but nothing prevented me from putting it all in one.
Yeah, maintenance is keeping it simple. Okay. Yeah. I think we out of time. So some folks, anyone has some questions, or I will ask, since this is the last session with Viktor, if somebody wants to express what they learned, maybe say thank you, Viktor, thank you for the book. Anyone?
Yeah, it's been great for me. We were just discussing Crossplane for client projects, so I just got a really good head start with this. It's a great quick book to read, so really pleased how simple it is, to be honest. And Viktor, thank you for being here. It's been so nice to know you. And some of my colleagues didn't know you were coming in, and they were like, no, Viktor Farcic was in the room, how did we miss him? So everyone was jealous. But now it's all going. We want more of you, though. Thank you for showing up. And
I cannot guarantee another book anytime soon. So some other type of event.
Next Christmas, right? Think about what will be the next thing you write. Anyone else before we drop?
And thank you, Viktor. This was really helpful. It's kind of hard to find documentation for Crossplane, and your book really helped me to get through the basics. It goes step by step from compositions to CRDs to functions. It really helped me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Yeah. If this wouldn't be recorded, I would tell you something about our documentation, but
it needs improvement, right? And PRs are welcome, right? Anyone that in the community, they're open source. Anyone else before we depart? I think SFN's put in the in the chat. It says this wonderful book session, and I look forward to learn more from your YouTube content. So you have some followers, subscribers, Victor.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
thanks, guys.
thank you.
Girls.
Safe saying
And
thank you.
Safe say thank you. Yeah, for me, thank you so much, Victor. I appreciate both your time, dedicated. You said during Christmas to write the book. I thought it was a very we need some books. I know it looks like a tutorial or a course, but the fact that you wrote it, put it in a book, I think is very useful to give someone like
Yeah.
here's something to from beginning to end. Like usually that's what I like about the technical books that we have is like it's a story that is beginning to end, and then you understand things in context.
But
And
also
then
doing by just, I mean, learning by doing just right away from just the first page.
I was going to say the usability of using the command line, right? You put the commands there, you put the GitHub repo, and it's a matter of like copy paste and understand, copy paste and understand, copy paste and understand. It's something that you get working right in your laptop.
Yeah, that's mostly a reflection of not as a judgment or anything like that, but my brain doesn't work by reading kind of if I spend more than 15 minutes reading some documentation, I go crazy. Kind of like I need to show me what I need to execute something, right? Otherwise, I don't know, my brain stops working.
Yeah, and last piece of feedback about the book. I like the fact that you at the beginning show the end result instead of like building the expectation of like you need to go to the end to see the final thing. You got people excited at the beginning, like this is what you're going to get, right? Get excited about it, and then let's build it.
One explanation could be get excited, but another explanation could be let me show you at the very beginning what's waiting for you so that you can give up early.
That's true. That's true.
Depends on how you look at it, right?
Yeah. And then lastly, dedicated every Friday, right? It's your night, Friday night. A lot of people
it's a
don't
pleasure.
do that.
This is not a dedication. This is awesome. I loved it.
To come here and talk to us and geek out around Crossplane, right? So I appreciate your time and dedication and being with us here. So
and
thank you so
ask
much.
me anything kind of sessions as well. That's been super fun.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining. I'll post the YouTube and subscribe to Victor's YouTube. I'm subscribed. That's something that I do in the morning. It's like there's something out new. I drink coffee and I watch Victor, and it's very nice that he keeps like the videos entertaining and short. I like that. Okay. Thank you so much, folks. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks,
See
everyone.
you next week.
See you next
Bye.
week. Bye.
See you, Victor. Take care.
See you,
See
Victor.
you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.